You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. My name is J. Christian Adams. I am the president and general counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. That is a 501c3 charity that is devoted to this issue 365 days a year. We worry about election fraud and election integrity. I am today appearing wholly in my capacity as the president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and my remarks will be confined entirely to topics which have nothing to do with any expert affidavit which I may have been filed in a federal court case in Georgia. I was formerly an attorney at the United States Department of Justice in the voting section, where I reviewed a wide variety of issues, including your own Georgia congressional redistricting over a decade ago. I was a presidential appointee to the President's Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. I am currently a presidential appointee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. I confine my practice exclusively to election litigation across the United States and even across the Pacific to Guam, where I have had a case involving voting rights for the last 10 years. I would like to talk to you today about two things. Number one, problems with mail balloting that generally occur around the country. And secondly, fixes to some of those problems. So let me start with mail balloting generally. I have 8 topics. I hope that I can keep your attention as I go through them. I will keep them fairly short on each topic. But there are 8 general problems with mail ballots. In summary, a mail election is probably the worst possible way to run an election. The worst. And I have 8 reasons for you. The first is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters. When you run an election in the mail, you are turning over your vote to the people who regularly deliver you your neighbor's mail. The post office itself says that their error rate is at best 5%. They have a goal in the post office for political mail of a 95% success rate. Well, you all know that that is a 5% failure rate. If you are 95% of the time successful with mail ballots, you fail 5% of the time. The Public Interest Legal Foundation has been monitoring mail balloting around the country, and there's some very fascinating data. For example, coming out of Nevada, where we were able to track in the primary and delivered this information first, that in Clark County, for example, 1.3 million mail ballots went out, 233,000 bounced because of the bad voter rolls, which I'll get to later, and 310,000 arrived. So it gives you a sense of what actually occurs in a mail election. But the bottom line is that mail balloting disenfranchises voters because 5% of them are lost, and even more of them are not counted because of errors that cannot be corrected. The second major problem with mail balloting is it destroys transparency. In other words, there is a value to having both sides watching the election, and that value is there's confidence in the process after it occurs. Now, isn't that interesting? One of the things that characterizes the 2020 election among many people, if not millions of people in your state, is a lack of confidence in the process. One reason that occurs is because mail ballots are voted outside of the view of election officials. Transparency is a good thing, and when you go to mail ballots, you lose transparency, which takes me to the third problem with mail ballots is that ballots can be voted by other people. What I'm about to tell you is not speculation. I will give you a direct citation to a federal court opinion that discusses this in great detail. If you want to see how voter fraud operates with mail ballots, if you care about these issues, please read a case that I litigated in the Federal District of Mississippi, the Southern District, called United States versus Ike Brown. I represented the United States while at the Department of Justice. I have a citation for you. It's 494 F sup second 440. I'll repeat that. 494 Federal Supplement 2nd, 440. The case is United States versus Ike Brown. In that case, you will find page after page after page describing what happens when mail ballots go to people who are on the margins, who do not have economic power, who rely on the local government for their jobs, for their livelihood. And what you will find in that case are swarms of notaries, swarms of ballot collectors voting ballots for people. This was live testimony in federal court by the victims who testified that other people came to their house and voted their mail ballots. This is not speculation. This is not a conspiracy. This is a judgment in favor of the United States of America. And you could read the details of which. One particular victim was named Susie Wood. She was regularly having other people voting her mail ballots. They would bring them to her house out of the mailbox, and they were regularly voting her ballots. When the judge interrupted our questioning of the victim and asked Susie Wood, why on earth would you be doing this? She said something I'll never forget. She said, Your Honor, the person coming to my house always knows who the best person to vote for is. That's in the opinion that I gave you that you can read. It's not isolated. But the third reason mail ballots are bad is it creates vulnerabilities in the system. The fourth reason mail ballots are bad is because they're going to bad addresses in Georgia. I can't speak entirely to the Georgia process, but I can tell you about Nevada. In Nevada, we went, and you could see a video if you Google Public Interest Legal Foundation Nevada video. We looked at the Nevada voter rolls, and we went to the addresses where people are registered to vote. And what we found are vacant lots, mines, liquor stores, pot shops, casinos, and other places like that where people are improperly registered to vote. And here's the important part. Mail ballots are being sent to these locations. Now, in Georgia, we can tell you exactly how many people on the voter rolls there were dead, duplicated, living in other states, or had more than one registration. In fact, we use the most rigorous protocols possible to arrive at these conclusions and we've been doing this for years at the Public Interest Legal Foundation, directly figuring out which are the improper registrations. We did that for Georgia well before the election. So the fourth reason why mail balloting is bad is because it ends up having ballots being sent to bad registrations. The fifth reason that mail balloting is bad is because it creates storage problems. Now, there's been lots of news stories about ballots in suitcases showing up and so forth, but I will tell you, none of that surprises me because ballots have to be stored somewhere if they're all coming in the mail. And that results in a wide variety of zany solutions, such as suitcases. And so what it does is it creates storage problems and it creates paranoia about when people actually see how the ballots are being stored. If you're in a busy election in a room and you have a lot of mail ballots, sometimes they need to be put in strange places, like under the desk or over in the corner. But people without election administration experience don't quite understand how hard it is to run an election sometimes. The sixth reason why mail ballots are bad is because you cannot cure them. In other words, if somebody's sitting at their home on the kitchen table mistakenly votes a mail ballot and fills it out wrong or does the envelope wrong, they can't fix it. They mail it in, and these are the sorts of ballots that get rejected, that they get disenfranchised because it's hard to cure them. Contrast that with in person. When you vote in person and you make a mistake, your ballot can be fixed. You can change something. You can spoil a ballot under Georgia law, but you can't do that with mail ballots. Seventh, voters don't often know if their votes are not counted when they mail them in. They check out of the system. They don't follow up. They don't have time. They expect their ballot to be counted and would be shocked to learn how many ballots are not counted that are mailed in. So voters don't even know that they're being disenfranchised. Let me uh, leave you on the list of problems, number 8, with probably the most important one. I saved the best for last. When you have a mail balloting system, election officials are not in charge of the process as much. It is decentralized. There's no central authority watching the system take place. You can't you can't see it, you can't observe it, you can't fix it, you can't make it better. It's almost like you've created a system of chaos. And so election officials should be on top of the process directly, not 3 days after it mails if it gets to the office. It's important that the very good election officials in Georgia have a greater role to play, and mail balloting takes that away. So those are the 8 problems that I've observed around the country over the years with mail balloting. I urge you to please read U.S. v. Ike Brown, because it will show you how a system breaks down when it comes to mail ballots. Now, I don't want to testify to y'all and not have a fix. And so I have a number of solutions that I would suggest that I want to go through with you very briefly. But I'm going to give you the most important suggestion that I didn't talk about, and you might wonder what it has to do with mail balloting. The single most important thing that the Georgia legislature can do is to ban private money from being used to pay election offices. That happened this year with the Center for Technology and Civic Life. It's an easy fix. I have written this legislation already to be introduced in other states. Now, why is this important? This money was being paid by billionaires into Fulton County, DeKalb County, other counties, because they knew the vulnerabilities of mail voting. They're well known by anybody in the election administration. But when you have private parties funding government election offices, like happened to the tune of nearly $500 million this last election, it is unfair and builds structural bias into the system. So that is the most important thing, in my opinion, that the legislature can do, is to ban private money from running election offices. The second thing that can be done is absentee ballots should be requested, not auto-mailed. The reason that is important is because the voter rolls have problems. And if you auto-mail ballots, you're mailing directly into those defects, into those problems. Next, absentee ballots should be requested for each election. People move, people die, people go into other states, they move away, they move within Georgia. So you should not have a system where you can request an absentee ballot for a primary and that carries over to the general election. Now, I'm aware that there was some litigation involving the Justice Department that relates to a runoff, but that's a different story. What I'm saying is, for a primary, the absentee ballot request should not extend to the general election. Next, signature matches must be real. They must be real and not given the short shrift, because it's one of the few things we have to protect against what I described was happening in the case of United States versus Ike Brown. I had the occasion to review all of those signatures, and I started to notice a pattern that the signatures of the people notarizing the documents as a witness or requesting them were strangely similar. The notary and the voter looked a whole lot alike. And so signature matches give law enforcement and election officials a beachhead to start to confront problems when the system breaks down. So signature matches must be real. Another thing that Georgia should consider that other states have adopted is having identifying numbers on the absentee ballot or absentee ballot request, such as a driver's license, such as a voter card, some other uniquely identifying information that proves the person voting the absentee ballot is the correct person. This is not expensive. It's not complicated, but it's simple to do. And that is to have some sort of voter ID, such as your voter card number or your driver's license number, part of the absentee ballot process or the mail ballot process. Next, a witness requirement is a good thing. Now, I will tell you, this was attacked all over the country, but it is a good thing when you move to vote by mail to have some sort of witness. Next, you should consider limits on how many ballots one person may deliver. Other states have already done this. Or how many ballots one person may witness if you have a witness protocol. The next thing you can do to both make the system work better and increase confidence in the system is to have centralized, transparent counting. You have to have transparency throughout the election process if you want people to believe in it. And I think wanting people to believe in the election process as valid is essential to the democracy and to the democratic republic we have. And if you have centralized counting processes, they have to be transparent. Next, absentee ballots have to arrive by election day. How about that wild idea? That election day is election day. And if you cast a mail ballot, you actually have to have it arrive. Now, I was involved in litigation in Virginia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation brought against the State Board of Elections of Virginia because they passed a rule that dispensed with the postmark and said you don't even have to have a postmark and it can arrive late. Now, that was in conflict with statute. And I brought a case against the State Board of Elections and was victorious and enjoined the State Board of Elections against following that illegal rule that was conflicting with statute, which raises another and final issue that I'll mention. You have to give people in your state the right to sue for violations of these election rules. How might you do that? Well, one might be a mandamus, that if a county election official is ignoring the law that you pass, that somebody has the right to go in and enforce it. So you might consider your mandamus either common law or statutory rules regarding mandamus. You have to give people the right to enforce these laws, because right now there's a patchwork in many places where the laws are enforced one way and not the other way. Uniformity is a good thing. But I want to close by reiterating how critically important I think it is to ban the use of private money in government election offices, because private money should not be going into how we run elections. We don't allow private armies, and we shouldn't allow private election office funding. So that's my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I thank you very much for everybody's time and attention, and I will close my presentation there.
Thank you. I recognize it was mentioned ongoing litigation may prevent you from answering questions, but I did have a couple of comments, and I think a couple of people that may want to ask a question nonetheless. Chairman Powell, did you have a comment or a question?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I want to thank Mr. Adams for his testimony. Very clear. Some of us that have been in political office for a period of time have always identified that the number one place for fraud, in our opinion, is the mail-in process or the absentee process. This was expanded back in 2005 in the state of Georgia against a lot of our wishes at that time. Now, that being said, one of the things, in lieu of the fact that the Secretary of State's office is not appearing today, I would like to ask a question of you. Some of us have said that we believe that the best thing that could happen right now, because of the failure of confidence for this election, was that the absentees or the mail-in and mail-ins, there should be an audit done onto these to see if there is any organized voter fraud based on matching of the signatures and things such as that. Could you address that? That might be out of your realm, but could you address that possibility of how we could implement an audit on these?
Thank you very much, Representative Powell. Yes, I can address that from personal experience. And look, there's nothing, I think an audit would have value if it's done correctly, but I'm going to tell you this. I had the power of the United States government, as well as my colleagues, in that case I talked about, United States versus Ike Brown. And we had the power of the United States Justice Department to attempt to basically do an audit. And I will tell you that it takes years. It takes enormous amounts of energy and time and manpower. I just don't want anyone to think that you can just start looking at a couple of documents statewide and reach many conclusions very quickly. It doesn't work that way. This is hard work. And look, I think an audit is always good to know the truth, right? But I just want everybody to go in with eyes wide open that these things take time, and it's not always fraud. And that's the other thing I want to emphasize is chaos. Chaos lends itself to its own outcome, and mail balloting creates chaos. And you don't have to have a conspiracy to commit a crime to still get a bad thing to happen. So I would be all in favor of always getting to the truth. I just want folks to know that it can be a long, long road to get there.
Anything further, Chairman Powell, or?
Well, I mean, I heard what he said, but I guess my specific question would be, in lieu of the fact that we have upcoming elections and we can't pass any type of law due to the fact that we can't go into any type of special session or pass any ex post facto laws, but is there any possible way that we could do a sampling audit of these type of votes to see if further litigation might have some of these votes or some of the areas possibly considered for banning if they were not properly certified by the election officials? I guess that's the point I'm getting to, because if that happens, then that we could take it to the next, possibly through litigation, take it to the next step.
Right. And look, if procedures were not followed in the statute, that is clearly a serious problem that you could audit and catalog. And I think some people have done that. And I'm going to try to steer a little clear of that topic. If I was doing this, here's what I would do. I would take the list of dead registrants that I know we created at the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and I would look to see how many of those cast ballots. I would take the list of people who moved away from Georgia that the Public Interest Legal Foundation produced earlier this year, that moved away from Georgia, and how many of those cast ballots. That's not a complicated thing. It actually could probably be done in a day or two. But it's important to do it correctly, and not, as many people have made mistakes around the country, they don't think there's anybody else with your same name born on the same day. Well, there actually are. Everyone on this call probably has people looking at the board here with somebody with maybe one or two exceptions who have someone with the same name born on the same day somewhere in the country. So I think it has to be done correctly, but that's another thing that people should consider.
So then a step further than that, then, to do a comparative list. So what process would we need to move forward with that? And I mean, we don't have, at this point, we don't know what the intention of the Secretary of State's office is. They had said that there would be an audit done with the recounts, but there was a recount, but no audit. And that's the thing that's been of primary concern to a lot of us. So legally, and I'm not an attorney, but maybe you could give some advice to that. How could we move forward to implement these type of comparisons to the local boards of elections around the state?
Well, that's a very good question. I apologize that I don't have an answer for you for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is I'm not close enough to the Georgia process. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Historically, Republicans have been the ones who have really used absentee mail-in voting, as you call it. But in this last election, we definitely did see more Democrats pick up and start to use mail-in balloting. We saw that 65% of Biden's votes in Georgia did come from absentee voting. And we saw that 35% of Trump's voters did use mail-in voting. That's almost 500,000 folks who voted for Trump who actually used mail-in voting. So clearly over time, mail-in voting has now become more bipartisan. And so it just seems kind of odd to me that you are testifying and launching an attack on using mail-in voting, because I just don't remember from other Republicans, I don't remember in general there being such an attack against absentee voting when it was mostly Republicans using it. So it seems to me that this new kind of upspring about Democrats, largely Black and brown voters who are using mail-in voting as of this year so much, it just really seems interesting to me that this is such a hot topic now about why people are using mail-in and exactly the process that goes along with it. I mean, I would encourage everybody to disregard your testimony. I mean, no disrespect to you, but it just, to me, a lot of the things that you're saying just don't make a lot of sense. And it is interesting that you did talk about your civil rights credentials and committees and things that you've served on, because you definitely have said things like you think it's okay to write down license plate numbers of voters.
That's not true. That's absolutely not true. Never
I would
said
ask
anything of the like.
You've said that people are
No.
playing the race card, ignoring the history of voter suppression in this country for Black and brown voters. So I just think that I just want to shed some light on the perspective of which you're coming from. My specific question is, why are you now launching such an attack against absentee voting? Because almost 500,000 voters in Georgia voting for, that's a lot of votes. This is a bipartisan effort to use mail-in voting. So just tell me exactly why you're launching this.
First of all, you're
Mr.
making
Adams,
this-
please do not comment any further on this.
Well-
She's made her statement. That's enough. We have pending litigation. I would ask that you not respond any further to her,
Well,
please.
I understand that, but she said some things that weren't true that I said. So I feel compelled to explain. I'm not coming at this from a Republican. I'm coming at this from somebody who's watched absentee balloting for a very long time. And by the way, I was against expanded absentee balloting 5 years ago before this was a partisan issue. So that's the first response. Secondly, those things you said that I said, such as license plates, flamingly false, and defamatory.
Representative Turner has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What you said a moment ago, you mentioned looking at the list of dead voters in Georgia. Our process here in Georgia at the Secretary of State's office has been following very closely. And even our independent activists in our community who have been critical of his performance during this have admitted that they have found 0 dead voters in Georgia. Their concerns around our voter rolls are more about people who file a change of address form, move out of the state, set up a life outside the state, and then still request a ballot here in Georgia. And they've alleged some 15,000 examples of those. And so while I would agree with you that voter rolls are a key issue in making sure that they're maintained, and there's some things that we probably need to be doing better in that regard, not probably, we absolutely must be doing better in that regard. Because you had said a couple of times you couldn't speak to this exact process in Georgia, I think it's very important that we clarify, dead people didn't vote in Georgia in this election. Potentially, there were people who cast ballots that shouldn't have, that have moved out of Georgia and their residency is no longer here. And so as to Chairman Powell's earlier question about the process of doing an audit, if we were going to start, I wouldn't say dead voters because there just aren't going to be any examples of that. Our Secretary of State pulls the records from every county whenever there's somebody that passes away, and they immediately remove them from the voter rolls. Those reports are going monthly to our local elections officials, and so that process is key. But I do believe we need to audit to make sure that we are following it. And this committee has done a lot of work to make sure that our voting process is 100% verifiable from beginning to end, and that there's a checkpoint and there's a record at every step of the way. When you request when your application is received, the signature match is happening at that point again for the first time. The records of when the ballot was sent out, when it was received, that it was actually processed. If there were problems, we have in our state statutes things that allow the voter to cure their absentee ballot if there are problems that didn't exist 4 years ago as a result of the work of this committee, by the way. So I would just like to kind of bring to light that there are some good things that we're doing there. And if you're going to make these suggestions, I would ask that we focus on the real problem areas, because there's been a lot of misinformation out there that's cast doubt in our process. And that's one of those things. It's a red flag for me when I hear, hey, you could have dead voters voting in Georgia. Well, that doesn't happen here. And we've pulled the data to find out whether or not that did happen, and it's shown that it hasn't happened. I would just like to focus on the areas where there are actual problems, and not some of the things where that could take us down a rabbit hole that will lead us ultimately to nowhere and give us a false sense of security, where we should be looking at the areas where there's actually a brush fire.
Representative Nguyen had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adams, you mentioned that your group uses a rigorous process to identify potential issues with invalid ballots. Specifically, you cited some of the issues are erroneous registrations, and you also named other instances of potentially folks casting invalid ballots for one reason or another, including double voting. I haven't had a chance to read the litigation that you did mention earlier, and I will take a look at that. But I did have a chance to read about the lawsuit that you filed in the state of Virginia, alleging that invalid ballots were cast by non-citizens. In that lawsuit, Social Security numbers were shared publicly, which resulted in the commitment of your firm to redact private information, identifying information that could potentially endanger folks that are being accused of committing a felony. And subsequently, your group was sued for defamation because it was found that these voters who are alleged to be non-citizens were in fact citizens in the state of Virginia. Can you share with us how your rigorous process yielded a result that your rigorous process did not hold up for this particular case in Virginia?
Yes, thankfully, that was not our rigorous process. That was the Commonwealth of Virginia's not very rigorous process. And what happened there is the Commonwealth of Virginia was removing American citizens from the voter rolls that were actually citizens being removed as non-citizens. And so that is about as bad as a process as you can have. What we did is we asked the Commonwealth of Virginia for the list of all of the people that were declared non-citizens who had been removed from the rolls by Virginia. The Commonwealth of Virginia published that list and gave it to us. And incidentally, they are the ones who published the Social Security numbers initially, not our organization. And we took them at their word that these were people who were declared non-citizens. And it turns out, believe it or not, that the Commonwealth of Virginia, which, by the way, I apologize to all the Georgia legislators who get to hear about what goes on in other states. The Commonwealth of Virginia was declaring American citizens as non-citizens and actually canceling their voter registrations. That's something I think we all can agree should never happen. And we discovered it through this lawsuit by assuming that the Commonwealth of Virginia was acting properly. Well, it turns out they weren't. And we relied on that information. And we drew reasonable inferences. If the Secretary of State of Georgia were to give you, Representative, a list of people that they canceled as aliens or foreign nationals, I think you would probably trust it also, like we did. And it turns out you can't. You can't trust everything the government does. So, but thank you for that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mr. Adams. In fact, if the Secretary of State or anybody else presented me with a list, I would absolutely not trust it. And I would go as far to say, if I were to pursue litigation, I would not take anybody's word on it. I would actually do the legwork it would require to uncover that those people were, in fact, wrongly removed before I followed lawsuit.
And you actually can't. That's part of the problem.
Defamation
and by the way, we didn't
those people.
Let me just jump in just a second. We do have two other people that have questions. So I'm gonna we're gonna move to Representative Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman. We appreciate your time, and I do not want to belabor too many points. I appreciate Representative Turner's focus on the NCOA process regarding the change of address. That is an area where I think we do have to be able to shore up our processes. But I want to point towards one of the solutions you talked about, and we do appreciate. It's one thing to bring problems, it's another thing to bring solutions. And your fourth solution was signature match, making sure that it's real. One of the things you did not mention was providing for or requiring an ID process within the mail-in process. Do you happen to have any type of an opinion on that, or maybe data that this committee could use?
And I actually, that's one of the things I would strongly recommend is some form of identifying number. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be your voter card, it could be your driver's license card. It could be a variety of things that the election officials have that you write either in your application or on your ballot to validate who you are. I'm not suggesting photocopying your driver's license. I don't think most people have the ability to photocopy at home, but something that proves who you are when you vote that mail ballot, that gives the election confidence that those are the same people. So yes, I'm very much in favor of something that is easy and doesn't have a financial burden on anybody to validate that they are who they say they are when they cast the ballot.
Okay, thank you.
And final question, Secretary Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did, am I unmuted? I think I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mr. Adams, you already stated that you're not that familiar with our processes in Georgia, but I want to echo what Representative Alan Powell said, Chairman Alan Powell, getting back to the idea of doing an audit of these signature verifications. I would argue that it's relatively easy in Georgia. What both the governor's call for, almost all the members of the Republican members of the General Assembly have called for, is an audit of these signatures between the application in which they arrive and the ballots envelopes. They're held for 2 years according to Georgia law in the Board of Elections offices. And at a minimum, you could use the power of statistics and just check. And it's all about voter confidence. I opened the meeting in prayer, and all I want is the truth. And the people I represent want to know whether or not it's true. Is there fraud or not? And an audit would reveal whether or not these signatures are matching up with legal voters or not. And I think it's a very simple ask, and echoes again what Leader Burns is requesting of the Secretary of State's office, and that would be bipartisan teams of advisors overseeing the signature verification process every time an application comes in, and certainly when a ballot comes in. So I just want to make sure that I'm on record is absolutely in agreement that we need a verification, an audit, if you will, of the signatures in each one of the Board of Elections offices across the state. Some sort of high degree of statistical accuracy. You wouldn't have to audit 1.2 million absentee ballot signatures. But that's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to have a say.
I got a last minute question. We've got about a minute left. Representative Oliver, do you think you can get it in there?
Yes, sir. Happy to limit myself to a minute. In listening carefully, I'm trying to differentiate these ideas that are maybe legislatively proposed later in 2021. I understand that the Republicans are building a case for legislative reform in the future, but I'm sure Mr. Adams is aware that there's an existing court order in relation to exact match signatures and various other significant procedures in relation to our existing absentee ballots. And Mr. Adams, you're not suggesting, are you, that the rules be changed in the middle of the existing election that comes before us on January 5th? I'm sure you're not suggesting a change of rules right now, because that would create enormous equal protection arguments when we have millions of people that are voting every day. Surely you're not suggesting that, or anybody is suggesting a change of the rules before January 5th.
Well, obviously I can't speak for everybody. I'll speak for myself. It is not my prerogative to time these changes. That's not what I'm here to tell you to do, is the time you do this. I'm telling you what makes sense. Now, my understanding is, notwithstanding a court order to the contrary, that you already have set these rules long ago, that these are legislative rules that were passed long ago regarding how mail ballots are counted. So I would never suggest that I advise you on timing, that's your choice. What I can tell you is that I think you've already done this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Adams, I appreciate you presenting and taking questions today. Thank you very much. We have up at 10 o'clock here. If he is ready, Mr. Brainerd,